Salutations, respective viewers. I'm George from Ireland, and here I am in front of the tomb of John Bunyan. So John Bunyan was born in Bedford, England in 1628, and he was brought up as a Christian in the Church of England, and at this time baptism became more popular here. So he was an adolescent in a time of enormous turmoil. The English Civil War erupted in 1642, and as an adolescent he joined the Parliamentary army. The Parliamentarians were fighting against the Royalists led by King Charles I. So the Church of England was riven. The more high church people who favoured the king's policy of Arminianism, of worship the Lord in the beauty of holiness, of colourful and ritualistic worship, and of blind obedience to the king. They tended to be on the royalist side, and the low church faction of the Church of England, who wanted to be proudly Protestant, be simplistic, emphasise scripture, they tended to be parliamentarians. Now there were also dissenters, those who dissented from the Church of England, also called Nonconformists. There are various other Protestant factions, Baptists and Congregationalists, whatever you call them. So Bunyan tended towards them, and he eventually became a Baptist. And the parliamentary leadership, they were Anglicans, members of the Church of England, of the low church faction, of the more strongly Protestant faction, but they tolerated other Protestant factions, such as Baptists and so on, and Quakers. Anyway, the Civil War ended, Bunyan returned home, he married, he had several children, and his trade was that of a tinker. By this, I don't mean the pejorative term for an Irish traveller. I mean somebody who made things out of tin. So he had been to school, he was literate, which couldn't be assumed in those days. Perhaps 30% of people in this country were literate, a bit higher for men than for women, because they didn't think it was worth sending girls to school in most cases. But often people were literate to a very low standard. Only been to school for a couple of years. Sometimes they could read, but they could not write, because of course paper was incredibly pricey, and often if they were writing at all in school, they were just scratching on slates with chalk or even sharp implements. But anyway, as we're to see, he was a very erudite person, and the Bible was one of the few books he had, but he knew it backwards. But he dipped into other literature too. And so then in Bedford there was a vibrant Baptist community, and a Baptist church started meeting. But in 1660, Charles II was restored. That's the son of Charles I. He came back and he said he forgave his father's enemies, but he promptly reneged on his promises. He was an Anglican, as in a member of the Church of England, but was a fairly high Anglican. And he began persecuting Protestants outside the Church of England, such as Baptists. So in those days, you needed a license to preach, because obviously if you're ordained in the Church of England, if you're a priest or a deacon or something of the Church of England, they think, oh right, this person's theology is acceptable, and that's that. We can't just have any Tom, Dick or Harry going around speaking on the streets about his or her religious beliefs. There might be people leading people away from true Christianity. But John Bunyan and his Baptists ignored this, so they did have their church and they were quietly tolerated. They began to go around and openly proselytize for their edition of Christianity, their particular type of Protestantism, as in baptism, adult baptism, and all the other Baptist beliefs, and saying, let's not have such opulence in churches, let's not have priests and bishops living on the fat of the land. There was a political aspect to it as well, so simplicity and emphasis on sola scriptura. So he constantly fell foul of the authorities, and he wouldn't take a warning, and he was arrested, he was prosecuted on numerous occasions, spending quite some time in jail. But he was absolutely gallant and determined to carry on. He was resilient, and so he spent several years in jail, and in prison he wrote Pilgrim's Progress, his most famous work. It's almost a picaresque novel, but it's about a character named Christian. And Christian does all sorts of fabulous things, and is allegorical as well, because all the obstacles he encounters represents the difficulty of living a Christian life and holding one's faith. So that's why he goes through Slough of Despond. No, not that town in Berkshire, but it's sort of like a swamp when he's down in the dumps. And he meets a hobgoblin with whom he has to tussle. What else does he do? There's Doubting Castle. So that's it. There's a danger that disbelief will creep in. And there's Vanity Fair, which was later taken by William Makepeace Thackeray as the as the title of his novel, and indeed that American magazine which exists to this day, and on and on. So that is Christian. who's progressing, being a pilgrim. And also he wrote the words of the hymn, "He who would true valour see, let him come hither. He'd with a giant fight, nothing will him affright," and all the rest, "and he shall have the right to be a pilgrim." And on and on. So that's him. He lived on to the age of 60, having spent almost half his adult life in prison, and died, and here he's interred with great honour in Bunhill Cemetery, where so many dissenters have made their final rest. That's not the only thing he wrote, but that's by far the most renowned.